There are moments when heaven chooses not to shout, but to interrupt a soul with a silence so profound, it demands attention. It was in such a silence that Saint Faustina Kowalska received the first of the 7 spiritual warnings. Warnings meant not for theologians alone, but for every ordinary household where life unfolds between dishes, deadlines, sorrows, and small joys. She had been at prayer before dawn, her heart steady, her breath quiet when the veil thinned. The Lord drew her not into a place of fire or judgment, but into the soft interior of a simple home, one that looked like the homes of countless families, modest, imperfect, worn by time, touched by love and fatigue in equal measure. The Lord spoke to her not as thunder, but as a gentle weight upon the soul. "My daughter, many dangers enter not through storms, but through what is ignored." And the first danger he showed her was not dramatic. It was subtle, nearly invisible to the untrained eye, the slow dimming of spiritual awareness. Faustina saw the family within the house, living their ordinary morning. The mother hurried, the father dressed himself in the grey heaviness of his worries. The children argued softly, the kind of bickering every house knows. Life seemed normal, nothing appeared evil or sinister, and yet something essential was missing. No one paused for a moment of gratitude. No one lifted the heart toward heaven. No one blessed themselves. The air was filled with movement, but not with remembrance. As Faustina observed, she saw that the absence of prayer did not enter like a sudden darkness. It entered like dust. Dust gathering slowly in corners no one cleans. Dust that appears harmless until it forms a film thick enough to choke the air. It was then that she saw it, a shadow resting near the far wall. Not a figure with claws or fire, something far more subtle. A faint distortion in the atmosphere, like a thought that does not belong, like a whisper with no voice behind it. It did not force itself into the home. It simply waited. Saint Faustina sensed its intention. Evil does not always invade. Sometimes it watches, observing where the soul has grown inattentive. When the father rushed out the door with his mind burdened by fears, the shadow quivered. When the mother sighed, too weary to pray, it shifted closer. When the children raised their voices without kindness, it breathed deeper, tasting the unguarded air. Then the Lord said something that pierced Faustina with a quiet sorrow. "The home that forgets me does not become empty. It becomes exposed." She understood then that this first warning was the most dangerous, precisely because it was the easiest to dismiss. It was not about sinning greatly. It was about forgetting slowly. And in every home where God is forgotten, even unintentionally, something else waits to take his place. The vision faded like a candle sighing in the wind, but the message remained burning in her heart. The first spiritual warning is the loss of holy attention. The soul that stops watching stops seeing the danger approaching. After the first warning faded from her sight, Saint Faustina Kowalska remained still, as though her soul were listening for footsteps behind a veil. She knew the Lord was not finished. Warnings from heaven never arrive alone. Each one leads to the next with the inevitability of dawn following night. And suddenly, the scene around her shifted. She was once again brought into the quiet interior of an ordinary home. Yet this time the atmosphere felt heavier, as though something unspoken weighed upon the rooms. The Lord allowed her to see what no human eye perceives unaided, the way darkness studies a household long before it enters. In the dining room the chairs stood neatly arranged, a half-folded blanket rested on the sofa, and the faint scent of yesterday's bread still lingered in the air. But there was a tension beneath the ordinary, a spiritual pressure, subtle and patient. The Lord whispered, "My daughter, behold the second warning, when discouragement becomes familiar." Faustina then saw a demon, not grotesque but deliberate, standing just outside the threshold of the home. It had no face, no clear form, only a presence shaped like a shadow deciding where to rest. It did not rush inward, it did not scratch or howl. Instead, it observed. It watched the mother wipe her brow, burdened by a fatigue she could not explain. It examined the father's silence at the table, his eyes fixed on nothing, carrying a disappointment he had never voiced. It noticed a child's sadness, the kind that grows when no one asks the second question. Are you sure you're all right? Faustina saw, with spiritual clarity, that discouragement in a home is like a cracked window, small, almost invisible, but enough to let in the cold. The demon approached the crack not with force, but with hunger. The Lord said, "When discouragement goes unhealed, the enemy does not attack the body. He whispers to the heart." And Faustina watched that whisper unfold. The mother suddenly felt unappreciated. The father felt unseen. The child felt unimportant. Not because these things were true, but because discouragement had made the family vulnerable to lies that sounded like their own thoughts. Faustina's heart trembled with compassion. She saw how quickly a home blessed by God can become spiritually weakened when sadness lingers without prayer, when wounds remain unspoken, when anxieties rest unchecked, when no one lifts their eyes to heaven for strength. Finally, the Lord said with sorrowful authority, "The enemy can imitate many things, but he cannot imitate hope. When a home loses hope, it becomes prey." At that moment, Faustina saw a gentle light appear above the table, a light invisible to the family, but unmistakable to the spiritual realm. It was only the faintest flicker of prayer, born from the father's tired heart as he thought silently, "God, help us." That whisper, barely conscious, made the demon recoil. Hope, even when whispered through exhaustion, is a sword. The vision ended. Faustina understood. Discouragement unhealed is the second warning. It opens the door through which many greater dangers enter. After the second warning dissolved into silence, Saint Faustina Kowalska felt the weight of heaven's sorrow pressing gently upon her spirit. She understood now that each warning was not merely information, but invitation, an invitation for the soul to wake, to watch, to guard what God had entrusted. The Lord then drew her into another home. Again, it was simple. Again, it looked peaceful. But this time Faustina sensed something different, a tension woven into the very air, like a thread pulled too tightly. The Lord spoke softly, "My daughter, behold the third warning, the fracture caused by unspoken words." What she saw was not an argument, nor a shout, nor a dramatic conflict. On the contrary, this home was quiet, too quiet. A silence hung between husband and wife, not a holy silence, but the silence born of swallowed words, of things felt but not spoken, of wounds carried alone. The children sensed the heaviness even if they could not explain it. Their voices were softer, their eyes more watchful, as though they feared stepping on invisible cracks. Faustina saw it clearly. The absence of reconciliation is itself a spiritual danger. Then the Lord opened her vision further, allowing her to perceive the invisible realm. At the dining room doorway stood a demon, the kind that does not roar but insinuates. Its presence was thin and sharp, like a thorn lodged in the atmosphere. It listened to the silence the way a predator listens to the trembling of a wounded creature. The demon approached the space between husband and wife, and with a movement almost imperceptible, it placed its shadowed fingers upon the invisible line dividing them. The Lord whispered, "Where love has cooled and apologies are withheld, darkness finds a place to rest." The demon did not create the silence, it exploited it. It whispered into the woman's heart, "Why should you be the one to speak first?" It murmured to the man, "If they cared, they would have said something." It breathed into the children's spirits, "Something is wrong here." Faustina saw how destructive this quiet fracture was. Not loud like anger, not violent like hatred, but subtle, deadly because it looked harmless. The Lord continued, "My daughter, many families break not through storms, but through the accumulation of words never spoken, apologies never offered, gratitude never expressed, fears never shared." Then Faustina saw something unexpected. In the corner of the living room, a small crucifix hung crooked on the wall, its presence modest, almost overlooked. Yet from it emanated a faint, patient light, like the heartbeat of heaven waiting to be acknowledged. The youngest child, moved by a grace she herself did not understand, approached the crucifix, touched it gently and whispered, "Jesus, help us." And the light expanded. It did not erase every problem. It did not repair every wound instantly. But it created space. Space for one heart to soften. Space for God to breathe healing into what had grown stale. Faustina watched the demon recoil, disturbed not by noise, but by humility. Humility expressed in the simplest prayer. The vision ended. She now understood. The third spiritual warning is the silent fracture that grows when words of truth, love, and repentance are withheld. Where reconciliation is delayed, the enemy finds a chair to sit in. When the third warning faded like incense dissolving into the morning light, Saint Faustina Kowalska felt the gravity of something yet unfinished. Heaven was not done speaking. The Lord was unveiling not isolated dangers, but a pattern, one woven silently into the lives of countless souls. Then the vision shifted once more. Faustina found herself standing at the entrance of a home where sunlight streamed through the windows, touching every surface as if blessing the day. But something was missing, not in what the eyes could see, but in what the spirit could not feel. The Lord said quietly, "My daughter, behold the fourth warning. The weight carried by days left without blessing." What unfolded before her was painfully ordinary. A family beginning their morning, coffee brewing, shoes being tied, children gathering their things, keys jangling, voices calling out questions and reminders, a symphony of daily life. But amidst this rhythm of routine, one thing was absent: the offering of the day to God. No blessing over the home, no sign of the cross, no moment of gratitude, no acknowledgement of heaven before stepping into the world. Faustina watched as the family moved from one task to another with admirable efficiency, yet without direction, not spiritually, but existentially. Their steps were steady, but their souls wandered. Then she saw it. Above the home, a thin cloud of spiritual dullness formed, not darkness, not evil, but a heaviness produced by the soul's forgetfulness. It descended silently, settling over the father's shoulders, dimming the mother's spirit, and stirring restlessness in the children. The Lord's voice came like a solemn melody. A day without blessing is a day left unprotected. At the edges of the home, Faustina discerned demonic spirits, not bold, not fierce, but opportunistic. They were like shadows waiting at the door, recognizing the vulnerability of a day begun without heaven's covering. One demon placed its attention on the father, whispering confusion into his responsibilities. Another circled around the mother, amplifying her exhaustion. A third touched the children, turning small irritations into disproportionate storms. Faustina's heart trembled with sorrow. She understood the truth the world forgets. Evil rarely needs permission, only neglect. The Lord continued, "When a soul stops blessing its day, the enemy begins to shape its hours." Then, in a moment of grace, the grandmother of the household appeared in the vision, older, slower, her hands marked by time. She sat at the edge of her bed, unaware of the spiritual battle unfolding around her, and whispered a single fragile prayer, "Lord, watch over them today." And it was enough. Her prayer rose like a thin ribbon of incense, piercing the dullness above the home. The shadows recoiled, the atmosphere shifted. Heaven intervened through the prayer of one who remembered what the others forgot. Faustina understood. The fourth spiritual warning is this: when the day is not offered to God, the home becomes spiritually unanchored. Blessing your day is not a ritual, it is a shield. As the fourth warning settled in her spirit, Saint Faustina Kowalska felt a new gravity rise around her, as though heaven itself were preparing her to witness something that afflicted not only households of her time, but of every generation to come. Then, without sound or movement, the scene shifted again. She found herself standing in a living room, glowing with the pale light of multiple screens, phones charging on the table, a television humming softly, tablets stacked without order. The house was full of noise without loudness, movement without direction, presence without communion. The Lord spoke, "My daughter, behold the fifth warning, when distractions become the household's daily bread." Faustina watched the family gathered together yet profoundly separated. The father scrolled through endless news, absorbing worry, controversy, anxiety. The mother, weary and overstimulated, drifted through images and conversations that left her soul emptier than before. The children, young and impressionable, stared into glowing rectangles as if they were windows to meaning, unaware of the shadows that perched silently around them. It was not that these objects were evil, it was that they had become replacements for what keeps the soul awake. At the edges of the room, Faustina saw demons unlike the ones before. These were not fierce or violent. They were thin, silent, serpentine, spirits of distraction. They moved quickly, lightly, touching the screens, whispering thoughts that felt like impulses, fanning the desire for more noise, more stimulation, more mental clutter. The Lord revealed the truth behind the vision. Where distraction rules, devotion dies. Faustina watched the consequences unfold. When the father tried to pray that night, his mind jumped like a restless animal. When the mother attempted to open scripture, her thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. When the children knelt to whisper their bedtime prayer, their hearts were dull, their minds racing. Not from sin, from saturation. There is a kind of darkness that enters not through wickedness, but through exhaustion of the soul. The demons of distraction danced softly, feeding on the family's inability to be still. They needed no violence, no dramatic temptation, only noise. The Lord turned to Faustina, his voice filled with sorrow and tender warning. The enemy's cleverness in this age is not to tempt souls with evil, but to drown them in the irrelevant. She saw that distraction weakens prayer, and weakened prayer weakens the soul. Distraction interrupts communion, and interrupted communion leaves the heart spiritually undernourished. But then, a small miracle. The youngest child, weary of the glowing lights, turned off the tablet and lay down on the floor with knees bent and hands folded beneath the chin, a posture of surrender older than centuries. With a whisper barely audible, the child said, "Jesus, can you hear me?" And heaven moved. The screens flickered, the shadows recoiled. The atmosphere softened. In a single moment of sincerity, a child reopened the spiritual window the family had forgotten. Faustina understood. The fifth warning is this: a distracted home becomes a spiritually starved home. The soul cannot hear God when it is drowning in noise. After the fifth warning dissolved like fading light upon calm waters, Saint Faustina Kowalska felt the approach of something heavier, like a truth that humanity prefers not to face. The Lord, with a sorrow that revealed his deep love for souls, drew her into yet another home. She recognized the atmosphere instantly. It was warm, lived in, filled with the scent of meals shared and memories stored. But beneath that warmth, Faustina perceived a chilling undercurrent, a heaviness not caused by fatigue, nor by spiritual forgetfulness, but by something more corrosive. The Lord spoke with solemn clarity, "My daughter, behold the sixth warning, resentment welcomed as a silent guest." Faustina saw a married couple sitting in the same room but miles apart in spirit. Their bodies shared space. Their hearts did not. One looked toward the window, as if the world beyond held the answer. The other looked toward the floor, as if searching for something lost. Between them, invisible to them but painfully clear to heaven, stood a demon, older and colder than the others she had seen. This one did not whisper temptations. It whispered memories, old arguments, old wounds, old disappointments, words spoken years ago but carried like fresh arrows. The demon touched each memory gently, as if polishing a weapon. Faustina watched as resentment, unchecked, unconfessed, unspoken, began to calcify the heart. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, with the precision of spiritual erosion. The Lord said, "Resentment is the enemy's throne within a home. Where it is honored, love cannot dwell." The demon of resentment did not provoke shouting or conflicts. Instead, it created distance. Distance in tone, distance in small gestures, distance at the dinner table, distance in the bedroom where two hearts once shared warmth. Children sensed it without understanding. Their laughter grew thinner. Their trust grew cautious. Their questions went unasked. Faustina felt a deep ache. She saw what many never recognize. Not all demons destroy by force. some destroy by freezing what must stay alive. Then the Lord allowed her to see the spiritual anatomy of resentment. It begins as a wound. Then the wound becomes a wall. Then the wall becomes a prison. And finally, the prisoner forgets they are imprisoned. Faustina watched the demon tighten its influence. A glance becomes cold. A word becomes sharp. A silence becomes punishment. A memory becomes poison. But then, in the midst of this spiritual frost, something unexpected happened. The wife, tired, broken, overwhelmed, closed her eyes and whispered a quiet plea. "Lord, I don't know how to forgive her, but teach me." It was not eloquent. It was not strong. It was not confident. It was real. And heaven responds not to perfect prayer, but to honest prayer. The moment the words reached the spiritual realm, light, thin but unwavering, shot from above and fell between the couple like a blade dividing shadow from shadow. The demon recoiled violently, unable to remain where forgiveness had been invited, even in seed form. Faustina understood then. The sixth warning is this: resentment, if not surrendered to God, becomes a spiritual intruder that drains the life of a home. But forgiveness, even in weakness, breaks the enemy's hold. When the sixth warning retreated like a shadow forced back by dawn, Saint Faustina Kowalska sensed that heaven was preparing her for the most crucial revelation of all. The air around her became solemn, almost weighty, as though every angel nearby stood still, attentive. Then, without transition, she found herself inside a home unlike the others, not because of its size or decoration, but because of what was absent. There was warmth, but no worship. There was laughter, but no foundation. There were plans, but no prayer. There was busyness, but no eternity. The Lord spoke to her with a tenderness that carried infinite sorrow. "My daughter, behold the seventh and final warning. When a home forgets heaven, it becomes a place where souls drift without anchor." Faustina looked around. Everything was lively, even joyful. Children played, the parents joked. The television murmured lightly in the background. Schedules were full. The pantry was stocked. The calendar overflowed. But in the spiritual realm, the house looked hollow. Faustina saw angels standing at the corners of the home, not rejected but unused. Their hands were filled with graces no one asked for, protections no one invoked, blessings no one sought. They waited, aching with a patience known only in heaven. And then she saw them, the demons outside, not furious, not violent, not even eager. They were patient. The Lord revealed the truth. The enemy fears the praying home, but he does not fear the comfortable home. The demons circled the house like vultures circling a body not yet dead, confident that a soul without eternal awareness would eventually open a door without realizing it. Faustina witnessed how forgetting eternity changes everything. When the father faced difficulty, he relied only on himself. When the mother felt anxiety, she sought distraction instead of grace. When the children asked questions about purpose, they received answers about schedules, not salvation. Nothing was evil. Everything was empty, and emptiness, Faustina realized, is the enemy's most precious gateway. Then the Lord's voice resonated with a divine solemnity. "My daughter, when a home forgets the soul forgets its home." Faustina saw the demon of apathy slip through an unguarded moment. An entire week lived without prayer, without gratitude, without remembrance of the one who gave them life. This demon was unlike the others. It did not stir anger. It did not provoke sin. It numbed. It lulled the home into spiritual sleep. And spiritual sleep, she understood, is the prelude to spiritual death. Faustina cried out in her heart, "Lord, what can awaken them?" The answer came like a soft, unstoppable light. One act of humility, one whispered prayer, one return to me. Then the father, restless in his heart, paused unexpectedly before bed. Something, no, someone, stirred inside him, and he whispered, "God, it's been a long time." And heaven erupted. Angels moved. Shadows fled. The spiritual atmosphere shifted instantly. Faustina understood the entire journey. The seventh warning is this: A home that forgets eternity forgets its purpose, its strength, and its protection. But the moment a soul turns back to God, even with trembling hands, the entire kingdom of hell loses its claim. The vision closed, silence returned, but the message would echo for generations.